As the United States pushed forward in its Pacific campaign, it launched a brutal amphibious assault on the island of Iwo Jima. What followed was one of the bloodiest battles in the United States Marine Corps' history, a grueling, hellish fight where every inch of black volcanic sand was paid for in blood. Though the Americans ultimately claimed victory, it came at a staggering cost. The battle stood as a grim testament to the unyielding resistance of Japanese forces who fought with relentless ferocity, willing to die rather than surrender. In the wake of its devastating attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Japan swiftly seized control of vast territories across Southeast Asia and the Central Pacific. Its expanding empire stretched west to Burma, south to the Dutch East Indies and New Guinea, and east to Wake Island. However, the tide began to turn as the United States took command of Allied forces in the Pacific. With a relentless counteroffensive, the Allies unleashed a coordinated assault by land, air, and sea, determined to reclaim lost ground and break Japan's hold on the region. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Ernest King, Admiral William Leahy, General George Marshall, and General Henry Hap Arnold, was established in 1942 to serve as the highest military command body overseeing US operations during World War II. Each member was a four-star officer representing a branch of the US military: the Army, Navy, and Army Air Forces. Notably, the United States Marine Corps did not have a representative within this body during the war. Military convention dictated that a single officer should oversee all armed forces in the Pacific Theatre. However, the Joint Chiefs of Staff could not reach a consensus on who should take on this role. At the urging of Admiral King, they decided to divide the Pacific Theatre into two separate commands. General Douglas MacArthur of the United States Army was given control over the Southwest Pacific area, while Admiral Chester Nimitz of the United States Navy took command of the Central Pacific area. Even with this division, there was significant debate over the best approach to advancing toward Japan. General MacArthur advocated for a southern route, insisting on retaking the Philippines as a key step toward Tokyo. In contrast, Admiral Nimitz pushed for an island-hopping strategy, bypassing heavily fortified Japanese positions and instead seizing strategically vital islands in the Central Pacific to establish air and naval superiority. In 1944, the Joint Chiefs of Staff approved a two-pronged offensive, incorporating both strategies. By October of that year, MacArthur had fulfilled his long-standing promise to return to the Philippines, leading an amphibious landing at Leyte. Meanwhile, Nimitz had secured the Mariana Islands, dealing a devastating blow to Japanese naval and air power. This dual approach proved critical in paving the way for the final assault on Japan. General Henry Hap Arnold believed that the Bonin Islands could serve as a crucial base for launching Boeing B-29 superfortresses and their bombing raids on Tokyo. In particular, he saw Iwo Jima as a strategic asset due to its location, roughly halfway between the Mariana Islands and the Japanese capital. Securing Iwo Jima would place US fighter aircraft within the range of Tokyo, allowing them to escort bombers and provide critical air support for operations in that region. However, Arnold lacked the ground and naval forces necessary to capture these islands himself, so he relied on the US Navy to do so. Initially, under the Joint Chiefs of Staff directive, Admiral Chester Nimitz had planned to invade Formosa as part of the Pacific strategy. However, after receiving recommendations from his senior admirals, Nimitz revised his approach and proposed capturing Iwo Jima and Okinawa instead. The Joint Chiefs of Staff approved his plan, and in October 1944, Nimitz began preparing for the invasion of Iwo Jima, later designated Operation Detachment. In May 1944, Japanese Prime Minister Tojo Hideki assigned Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kurabayashi, a seasoned and highly respected officer, to lead the defense of Iwo Jima. Though he understood that victory was impossible, Kurabayashi was determined to make the American invasion as costly as possible. He immediately ordered the construction of an extensive tunnel network beneath the island, designed to shield his forces from the relentless US bombardment while allowing them to move undetected and launch surprise counterattacks. Above ground, his troops built hundreds of pillboxes, blockhouses, and gun emplacements, many so well fortified that only direct hits from naval gunfire could destroy them. However, rather than heavily defending the beaches, where most prior island battles had been decided, Kuribayashi devised a different strategy. He positioned his soldiers deep in caves and tunnels, waiting until US forces advanced inland before unleashing a devastating, coordinated infantry and artillery assault. In a stark break from traditional Japanese military doctrine, he strictly forbade the often suicidal banzai charges. Instead, he ordered each one of his men to kill at least 10 Americans from concealed positions before dying in combat. By the time the US invasion began, Kuribayashi had assembled an estimated 21,000 soldiers on the island of Iwo Jima. Admiral Chester Nimitz organized a US Joint Expeditionary Force composed of Navy and Marine Corps units to execute Operation Detachment, the planned invasion of Iwo Jima. This formidable force was supported by an armada of 11 warships tasked with softening Japanese defences through sustained naval bombardment prior to the landing. Command of Marine Corps operations fell to Major General Harry Schmidt, who led a battle-hardened force consisting of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions, a combined total of approximately 70,000 Marines. US military intelligence had significantly underestimated the enemy, reporting that only 13,000 Japanese defenders were stationed on the island and that the beach terrain was well suited for landing operations. Based on this assessment, invasion planners chose the southeastern shoreline as the primary landing zone, dividing it into 7 designated beach sectors, arranged from southwest to northeast. Green Beach was assigned to the 28th Marine Regiment, tasked with cutting across the island's narrow half-mile bottleneck to isolate and capture Mount Suribachi, the island's highest point and a key defensive stronghold. Red 1 and Red 2 beaches were assigned to the 27th Marine Regiment, which would advance northward past Motoyama Airfield No. 1. Yellow 1 and Yellow 2 beaches were assigned to the 23rd Marine Regiment, and their objective was to capture and secure Motoyama No. 1 Airfield and support further advances inland. Blue 1 and Blue 2 beaches were assigned to the 25th Marine Regiment, and they were responsible for securing the right flank of the invasion force by moving eastward. General Schmidt, based on prior Japanese tactics, anticipated large-scale banzai charges, a common strategy in previous Pacific battles. Believing that these desperate massed assaults would accelerate the American victory, he optimistically estimated that US forces would secure the entire island within 4 days. However, Schmidt and his commanders were unaware that Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the Japanese commander, had forbidden banzai charges and instead devised a deeply entrenched, coordinated defensive strategy that would turn the battle into one of the most grueling and costly engagements of the war. Before launching his Marines onto the beaches of Iwo Jima, Major General Harry Schmidt had requested a 10-day naval bombardment to weaken Japanese defences. However, his request was denied due to Admiral Chester Nimitz's tight operational schedule, which prioritised preparations for the upcoming Okinawa invasion. Instead, Schmidt was granted only 3 days of shelling. Poor weather further hampered the bombardment, and when combined with the island's heavily fortified defensive positions, the naval firepower proved largely ineffective at neutralising Japanese strongholds. At 0900 hours on February the 19th, 1945, waves of US Marines began landing on the southeastern shore of Iwo Jima in staggered intervals. Instead of firm, stable ground, they were met with deep embankments of volcanic ash rising 15 feet high. This soft, unstable terrain bogged down tanks, vehicles, and troops, creating severe congestion as Marines struggled to advance inland. Kuribayashi had deliberately held his fire until the beaches were jammed with the US forces. As soon as the Americans were densely packed and vulnerable, he unleashed a coordinated assault, directing artillery, mortars, and machine gun fire from hidden bunkers, tunnels, and pillboxes. What was expected to be an orderly and methodical landing instantly descended into chaos as Marines were pinned down under relentless enemy fire, fighting desperately to carve out a foothold on the island. Major General Harry Schmidt deployed units from the US Naval Construction Battalions, known as Seabees, equipped with bulldozers to clear the thick volcanic ash that had hindered movement on the beach. Their efforts helped ease congestion, allowing the 28th Marine Regiment to push forward. By the end of the first day of battle, the Marines had successfully isolated Mount Suribachi from the rest of the island, cutting off Japanese forces entrenched within the volcanic stronghold. On February the 21st, 1945, Kuribayashi launched a coordinated kamikaze attack against US Navy vessels supporting the invasion. Several American ships sustained severe damage, but the assault did little to halt the relentless Marine advance on land. 2 days later, on February the 23rd, after brutal close-quarters combat, US Marines finally secured Mount Suribachi. In a moment that would become one of the most iconic in military history, Marines raised the American flag atop the summit, not once, but twice. The second flag raising was captured by Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal, whose image became one of the most famous combat photos of World War II, later earning him the Pulitzer Prize. The image symbolized the determination and sacrifice of US forces in the Pacific Campaign and remains an enduring representation of American military valor. As the battle raged on, the 23rd, 25th, and 27th Marine Regiments found themselves measuring progress in yards rather than miles. Facing relentless Japanese resistance, despite the grueling combat, the 23rd Regiment succeeded in capturing Motoyama Airfield No. 1 by February the 24th and Motoyama Airfield No. 2 by February the 27th. However, pushing beyond these positions became increasingly difficult. The Marines now faced the first major Japanese defensive line, located beyond a treacherous sulfur plain filled with man-made fortifications and natural obstacles. Japanese forces pounded US troops with artillery barrages during the day, and under the cover of darkness, sabotage teams infiltrated American lines, planting mines along with supply routes to cripple movements and disrupt reinforcements. On February the 27th, with progress stalled, the Central Regiments received reinforcements from the 21st Regiment of the 3rd Marine Division. Together, they launched a massive coordinated assault, successfully breaking through the center of the Japanese defensive line. By the next day, February the 28th, US forces had overrun the ridges overlooking the unfinished Motoyama Airfield No. 3, making a significant tactical gain. However, intense combat raged on the right flank, where some of the most brutal engagements of the battle took place. The Marines encountered stiff resistance at the amphitheatre, Turkey Knob, and Hill 382, a heavily fortified elevation soon dubbed the Meat Grinder. From these strongholds, Japanese forces unleashed a relentless barrage of machine gun, mortar, and artillery fire, making every inch of ground costly. To root out the entrenched defenders, Marines resorted to flamethrowers and explosives, systematically clearing bunkers and tunnels in vicious, close-quarters combat. Despite their efforts, the fight for this sector remained a bloody stalemate, even after the Marines secured the Meat Grinder on March the 2nd. The battle for Iwo Jima was far from over, and the cost in lives continued to mount. At the northeast end of Iwo Jima, the 28th Marine Regiment, supported by troops from the 5th Marine Division, engaged in fierce combat for control of Hills 362A and 362B. The battle for these high points was grueling, but by March 3, 1945, the Marines had finally secured both hills, though at great cost. Meanwhile, the 21st Marine Regiment pressed forward near the northeastern shore, successfully capturing Hill 362C. Despite these advances, a small but determined group of Japanese soldiers continued to hold out in a heavily fortified position known as Cushman's Pocket. On March 8, 1945, Japanese Navy Captain Inoue, acting against Kurabayashi's orders, launched a desperate nighttime banzai charge, hoping to dislodge the Americans from their hilltop positions. However, the attack proved futile. US Marines repelled the assault, inflicting heavy casualties on the attackers. With Japanese forces weakened, the Marines seized the opportunity to push forward. By March the 10th, they had finally eliminated the last Japanese defenders from the amphitheatre and Turkey Knob, securing these locations after weeks of brutal close-quarters combat. Though the battle was nearing its end, isolated Japanese resistance still remained, determined to fight to the last man. Despite continued Japanese resistance at Cushman's Pocket, the northwest coast, and a small sector along the eastern shore, US forces officially declared Iwo Jima secure on March 16, 1945. However, in reality, the battle was not yet over. Pockets of Japanese holdouts remained hidden within the island's extensive tunnel networks, waiting for an opportunity to strike. On the night of March 25-26, a group of several hundred Japanese soldiers slipped behind enemy lines near Motoyama Airfield No. 1. Under the cover of darkness, they launched a surprise assault, killing approximately 100 American troops in their sleep before US forces quickly mobilized and eliminated the attackers in a final, desperate firefight. With the last banzai charge, The remaining Japanese defenders were either killed or captured, marking the final engagement of the Battle of Iwo Jima. On March 26, 1945, after more than a month of relentless combat, Ireland was finally and fully secured by the United States. Operation Detachment was one of the bloodiest battles in the United States Marine Corps' history. By the time the fighting ended, nearly 18,500 Japanese soldiers had been killed, with only a handful taken prisoner. The American toll was staggering. Approximately 6,800 US Marines lost their lives, and another 19,200 were wounded in the brutal, month-long struggle for the island. In recognition of the extraordinary bravery and sacrifice displayed during the battle, 27 Medal of Honors, the highest military decoration awarded by the United States, were presented to Marines and Navy personnel, making it the most Medal of Honor recipients for a single battle in the history of the United States. The ferocity of the fighting underscored the unyielding grip of Japanese military indoctrination, which emphasized death over surrender. The Marines were forced to fight to the last man, as nearly all Japanese troops chose to die in combat rather than be captured. Even Kuribayashi, the island's commander, refused to surrender. Though his exact fate remains unknown, some accounts suggest he committed seppuku, ritual suicide, rather than fall into the hands of the Americans. For the few Japanese soldiers who did survive, returning home was often met with shame and ostracization. Their failure to die defending the homeland was seen as a disgrace by society deeply ingrained with the wartime code of Bushido, a final tragic consequence of Japan's relentless military ideology. For the United States, the hard-fought victory at Iwo Jima provided the Army Air Force with valuable airfields that played a role in the final months of the Pacific War. However, the strategic necessity of the battle has been widely debated, with high-ranking generals and military historians questioning whether the cost in lives was justified. Military historian and Marine Corps Captain Robert Burrell has argued that the primary justification for Operation Detachment, the need for fighter escorts to accompany B-29 Super Fortress bombers on raids over Japan, was largely overstated. In reality, only 10 escort missions were ever conducted from Iwo Jima, making it a minimal factor in the overall air campaign. While B-29 bombing raids did operate from the island and had a significant impact, these missions were not originally cited as the justification for the invasion prior to the war's end. Instead, the most commonly cited post-war rationale for the battle was Iwo Jima's role as an emergency landing site for damaged bombers returning from Japan. Following the island's capture, 2,251 B-29s landed on the island, but evidence suggests that most were not in immediate distress and could have made it back to other bases. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of the decision to invade was that the Joint Chiefs of Staff did not consult the Marine Corps leadership or seriously consider the concerns of their own planners before ordering the assault. Had they done so, they might have re-evaluated the necessity of the operation, and, in doing so, potentially saved thousands of American and Japanese lives. If you've enjoyed this episode of World War II Wayfinder looking at the invasion of Iwo Jima in February 1945 and would like to support the channel, then please check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account. Thank you, and I'll see you all in the next one.